what it means for business who are actually surviving and wants to thrive in a tough economic condition is actually to understand and then to capture the people who actually comes into your funnel.
Welcome everybody. My name is Haresh Singhani. This is Conversations with Haresh. We'll be talking to people of varied backgrounds, covering various topics. I'm very excited to be able to share these with you. The goal is to increase curiosity and empathy amongst all of us to help us grow professionally and personally at all levels. And of course, we also want to make sure that this is fun. So thank you again, and we'll look forward to having you. Another attempt at continuing this, Lan. So we're talking about your background and so on. And you've been in the States for over 3 decades, came here for grad school in the 80s, late 80s. And what did you study, and how did you end up studying whatever it is that you chose at the time?
Undergrad study, I did mechanical engineering, and for grad school, I studied industrial engineering, particularly around ergonomics and human machine robotics, computer-aided design and manufacturing at those times. Yeah.
I see. And which school was it in the U.S.?
I went to North Carolina State University, NCSU, the Wolfpack.
Oh, okay. Okay. And what was the reason to choose that institution?
So I had a English teacher back when I was in China. She was from North Carolina. So in conversations, etc., I get to know about North Carolina. And then when it came time to apply for grad school, that was on the list. And then now, of course, North Carolina State University was one of the first schools that sent me admission papers.
This was in 89, you mentioned, right?
Yes, yes.
So a very eventful year for China.
Indeed.
How did your personal journey and the journey of the country, if you will, interplay?
Wow, that's a really distant memory, and some days it still seems very, very fresh. Yeah, so there was an event around young people seeking for policies and the government to be more democratic. And I think, if you knew a little bit about history, it did not end too well for the students. So at that time, I was in that population, right? I was actually in the student population. I was very, very disappointed, very saddened by the turn of events. There was the opportunities, right, to leave the country and then seek advanced education in the Western world. So I just took the very first opportunity and got on the airplane and ended up in North Carolina.
Of course, of course. Obviously, we're referring to what became known here, at least, as the Tiananmen Square set of events, right? And which happened in 89 and started many protests, and then eventually the government brought down the hammer and so on. And you were in Nanjing. A lot of the events that we saw, at least in the news from here, I don't know exactly how widespread it was. I mean, we just remember all the Beijing shots in the media, right? So in the other geographies of China, how intense was it? In Beijing, of course, it was very intense.
Yeah, in Beijing it was intense. It was massive demonstrations which crossed the whole spectrum of population. And then there was bloodshed. There were tanks rolling on the square, right? The iconic image of students standing in front of the tank still gives me chills when I thought about that image. Elsewhere in the country, there were demonstrations, but nowhere near as close to the scale and the intensity that was in Beijing.
I'm sure we could spend many, many hours probably on just what happened or how China was operating at the time, but also then what your experience was like when you got here. But had you traveled to the States or outside of China extensively or somewhat before you started grad school?
No, not at all. Not at all. I was born and raised in the same city, went to elementary school, middle school, high school, college, and even entered the first year of grad school in the same city.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
It was my first time getting on an airplane, actually, leaving leaving Shanghai. Yeah.
The U.S. is full of immigrants, and I am an immigrant myself from India, as you know. I came here about 5 years before you did. And for me, it was the start of high school. that happened actually in Seattle due to family. That was my uncle and aunt and a bunch of other cousins. But the uncle was working aerospace, and that's how I ended up in Seattle. It's such a common story, right? That an immigrant who's never traveled anywhere in life shows up at a port in the US somehow. All the shock and awe, culture shocks of all kinds, right? Because for me, at least, it was and I didn't realize it at the time, but somebody told me this later. Immigration like that, especially in the time when there was essentially no internet, you are severing all ties, almost all ties with your homeland. And so family, food, culture, language, clothing, weather, cities, neighborhoods, friends, history, I mean, everything. The psychologists or the psychiatrists even call it a loss, right? And then you go through this process of grieving. I don't know, especially kids my age, at least at the time in early teenage years, realize that's not how we characterize that experience. And thankfully, it's not just loss, right? You're gaining this whole new culture and a whole new place, and then eventually a whole set of friends, and then new set of family, etc. And then you've been here now 3.5 decades, right? And so for practical purposes, you're probably an American. I don't know, or maybe that's a touchy subject. I'm not sure in your family or for you, but
Yeah, absolutely. Through and through, 100% American.
I think we become more American with the experience of becoming a parent in America, right? Because that provided us an opportunity to go through life as a child vicariously through our daughter, in our case, right? And so you come to the States, you start grad school, and then you start working. What was the focus like between just like getting your footings, establishing a base, having some, financial professional stability so that you could, have a real life at some point later, I suppose. Was there some of that kind of happening or mentality that you went through or phase?
We were poor, right, at that time. I was particularly very poor student.
And you weren't alone, probably, like that.
That's very true. That's very true. So I think I brought $800 with me. That's the entire family's sort of saving. And came to the US. I think immediately I felt the need to work hard, to find any opportunity to go work, to earn money while going to school full time. So one of the first jobs that I did was actually teaching physics labs at the university. So that's one advantage of being a graduate student and have good academic records and understanding physics and math very well, and then being able to articulate, impart knowledge or help undergrad students. So I taught physics labs the first year. In my spare time, I actually worked as tutor at the student center for the university. And on weekends, I work in restaurants just to make some pocket money as well as have a good
What
meal.
did you do? Were you a cook, or were you in the front of the house, or what did you do in the restaurant?
Okay, I did all kinds of things. I washed dishes. I was a busboy, and then I waited table, took phone orders at that time, so the takeout restaurants and all that. So I did all kinds of stuff.
And we earlier mentioned that you've been working in multiple parts of the world, right? So you came back, you were in the States for a couple of decades, and then you went to Asia Pacific and Australia and so on, and then you've been back here kind of for the last couple of 3 years. So one of the things we had discussed was kind of your experience and your journey recently in working in different parts of the world. I'm curious how maybe your experience as, multicultural immigrant, I suppose, affected your later years professionally and as a leader, how those made you maybe more successful or more aware. Or maybe it was not necessarily an asset, I don't know. How were you able to relate to different cultures and different people and different leaders in different geographies as you went outside of the US after having been here for a while?
Yeah, so I think very rewarding experience, I would say, last 30 years overall, 35 years. And the recent experience that you had mentioned, professionally, I moved across the world to Australia with my wife and also with our youngest son, who was in high school at that time. That was a really enriching and a rewarding experience. It's tough to go through. I'm very grateful that actually my wife indulged me on this adventure, right? Shutting down residence here, move across the ocean, almost at the opposite end of the time zone with a teenager in tow, going through high school, and also, within the recent years, traveling back, making a stop there in Hawaii. So it was a lot of work in terms of getting family and all that organized. So I'm very grateful to have a very supporting wife and family through this experience. Professionally, I think it was most rewarding that I get to work with people from different cultural background, professional background in various different countries. I think the work culture here in America is somewhat homogenous, I would say. Okay, everybody works really, really hard. Everybody is very ambitious. Everybody is very focused on reaching either professional goals or business goals, very driven. And we don't take vacations as much as our counterparts do in Europe, definitely, and then also in Australia, in other different cultures. So if I were to sum it up, I think I get to appreciate the people and the culture, work culture there is you work to live. There are obviously varying degrees of level of intensity, or what do you consider as hard work, right? There's varying degrees of that. But over time, I've learned from those people that I get to slow down, smell the flowers, and enjoy the fruits of our labor. So I think if I were to take away one thing from that all experience is that, people in other cultures don't work or don't need to work as hard as we do as Americans.
I see. Okay. I mean, there's a lot of content around the world saying how Americans, we work very hard. And I guess I also classify as an American, by the way. But our stress levels and kind of happiness levels are maybe not, well, because we work so hard, maybe stress levels are expected to be higher, maybe, or we compete so hard amongst each other or with each other. But it seems like we're not necessarily getting rewarded. I don't know, for all the extra work and stress and anxiety that we might be going through as the American teams. But I mean, if you had to pick one system over the other, and I'm sure not the rest of the world is not homogenous. America may be, relatively speaking, within itself. But, when you go to one country in another part of the world versus another country in another part of the world. So do you have a preference for one over the other?
That's a very, very good question. You broke up a little bit, so I think I get the gist of your question. You're asking about my preference on
between what you saw in other countries and other cultures professionally and as a business leader versus the US. Yeah. And maybe just in general, right? Like if you couldn't travel around and have all these experiences, but you are fixed to one country for your personal and professional journey, or one paradigm, right, between American and the other side, what would it be?
It depends on where I am in my life journey. So I think in my 20s and 30s, maybe even 40s, I actually would definitely prefer to build a career, have work experience in America, because after all, America still has some of the biggest opportunities and with brightest people with very, very innovative mind and very motivated, a lot of motivation to be successful. I think that's actually very, very important in a career, early stages of the career. So in the 50s and 60s, when I'm getting ready to retire, I do feel that, some of these social benefits and the slower pace of different societies, I find that to be a little bit more attractive. Yeah.
I see. So you want to choose what's convenient, like all of us, or more convenient, I suppose.
I think it's a matter of perspective, right? What you need at certain stage in life, it dictates, yeah.
I mean, our needs evolve and our preferences evolve, right?
Yeah, but overall, I think as a business owner, as employees, US actually get a lot of advantages over the rest of the world.
All cultures have, or all geographies have positives and negatives, and it seems like even in spite of all the challenges that America has, it holds, people's imaginations, right, very strongly. Or ambitious people, for whatever reason, are driven to the US. And probably the biggest reason is that because there are a whole bunch of other ambitious people here, right? And they're making things happen. And so we're still seen as the land of opportunity. And at least that's what my experience has been. And then all those people that I've kind of run into say or feel.
I'll give you a couple of examples, right? For some of the small things actually make you shape your opinion and shape your sentiment towards certain business culture. So we were moving back to our old house and we need to get the Wi-Fi broadband connection reestablished. And that was done at the Xfinity office, I think on a Saturday morning within half an hour. Everything is done. And the similar experience when I first moved to Sydney, now this is 7, 8 years ago, when we have to move different apartments, that broadband connection took me 2 months to get set up. I was roaming through mobile. I was, going to coffee shops to get the Wi-Fi in order just to get things done. But for some reason, right, in the slow-moving societies or less tech-savvy areas, right, things just get done with not great efficiency. The customer experience of those services are really, really poor.
I mean, I've experienced that in other countries. My most frequent place to go to outside of the US is India. And it's like a bank visit can be very unpredictable sometimes if you're depending on what you're trying to do. And I've spent hours trying to move funds around and stuff like that. We're not talking about super large sums of money, but it can be a very different experience, I suppose. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your, of course, everything only that's only publicly available, but do you want to tell us a little bit about your current team and your current work, the domains and geographies and what you're doing? And then one of the questions I wanted to find out about was, the other team members that are in the teams, and with the different geographies, you probably also have different age groups, right? So, how are people able to become a team and execute at a very high level alongside all these geographic, time zone, language, culture, professional expectation, leadership expectation differences, and so on?
So right now I work as Vice President of Customer Success for Asia Pacific Japan for a French MarTech company called Contentsquare. What Contentsquare does is provide the digital experience analytics and product analytics to businesses that truly, truly care about their customers' digital experience, their platform, whether it's a web, whether it's on app. First thing first is, it's MarTech, right? Analyzing user behavior data, trying to figure out what the customer intents are, right? When they are visiting your website, when they're on your app, and then trying to detect friction so that you can have abilities, you can direct development effort to remove those friction points. This is actually not a new thing. I think Amazon back in the late 90s, early 2000s, right, figured out the click trail analysis, eventually pioneered the analysis tool. When you're on their website, they'll figure out what you're looking at, how long you look at a certain, and what did you go after this page. And hence, people who looked at this also looked at that. People who bought this also bought those, right? Those are the dynamic recommendations that Amazon was able to pioneer, right? Decades ago. So I know you worked at the Amazon. I don't know if you had experience in those in early days.
Yeah, it was a small team, so everybody was kind of exposed to everything. For me, the software teams were actually clients, internal clients, because I was on the infrastructure side. It's probably like many domains, but technology tools evolve very fast. So a lot of the things that are available as tools to other people right now, where the first generation internet companies had to do it themselves, including Amazon, right? So click analysis or bunch of Amazon probably couldn't go somewhere and say, oh, give me a shopping cart, they had to do it. Right? But obviously this is a huge domain and all consumers are affected by it, right? We are all online shoppers or surfers in some capacity or another, probably every day. And so maybe as consumers, we're not aware of what goes into the magic that is created by the other side, the merchants, technology teams themselves. So obviously there have been a lot of changes in this domain. Maybe there always are, but one of them has been Apple, Google, and a bunch of others cracking down on user tracking and cookies and things like that. And I'm curious how Contentsquare does or has to offer becomes more valuable to end merchants or e-commerce brands or web brands, I would say. How do you see that evolving in the last, next whatever few quarters, few years?
So yeah, e-tail, online retail, brands, etc., right, are the only one asset. It's like the most direct impact, right? People see conversion rate, online sales performance, etc. Those they need tracking. It's actually across the whole spectrum, right? So for government agencies, for financial and services, insurance, and all that, right? So anybody or any entity, any enterprise that actually want to interact with their customers.
So you're looking at anybody who has a web experience for somebody else, right, is a target customer. It's not just the commerce.
Yeah, so with cookies going away, right? So more and more company would have to rely upon first-party data, which is when they come to your digital property, then you can rely upon their behavior. That's why a lot of companies move to apps, right? Because they know who you are. When you install it, they have your ID and they understand exactly what you do, and they tie to who you are. But on web, there are ways, right, to understand, to profile a certain client without using cookies. And also with digital experience analytics, you don't need to actually know about certain individuals. We put them into different segments, cohorts of people who eventually convert, right? Who eventually reach a certain destination that you design
You want them to, yeah.
You want them to. So yeah, there's a lot of innovation, creativity that's actually getting into this part of the business. So there's a lot of competitors as well, Google Analytics, Adobe. So they're all the big players in the whole ecosystem. Everybody's trying to figure out where their up market and where their downstream markets are. It's a very fascinating field, and it's also rapidly changing as well, the landscape.
Got it. The economy or the interest rates, Ukraine, Israel last year, these things have not been kind to many sectors of the economy or tech economy, right? I guess in the most concrete way, most of the people have felt the cost of money going up. And so sometimes there's a very huge correlation between that and marketing spend because, I could spend a lot more on marketing when money is more accessible, I suppose. And that's probably true with a lot of spend. So is that a positive or negative thing as far as prospects for, some of the peers you mentioned, your teams, etc., as well as your clients?
No, overall, it's been very, very tough economic environment to grow the business for the factors that you mentioned, right? So our recent benchmarks show that the traffic for we segment into different industry verticals, but all across all verticals, traffic has been down 5%. So the overall traffic. And then the frustration. So there's a way for us to measure frustration score where people either rage click, right, or immediately bounce. So frustration score has gone up, about 5-6% compared to previous year. So there's some other factors. The bounce rate are actually increased. What it means for business who are actually surviving and wants to thrive in a tough economic condition is actually to understand and then to capture the people who actually comes into your funnel. So
Okay.
we're talking about we need to manage the audience that comes into your funnel with more efficiency and try to understand where they're frustrated, try to make their journey smoother. For example, right, shopping cart is actually something that we are very good at analyzing. So when people reaches their shopping cart, it means that they have true intention to buy. But the sometimes promo code, right? People pause there to look for a promo code, and the ship to address, okay, bill to address. Those are some of the typical friction points. But if you look at what Amazon did many, many years ago, was that they make this one-click shopping. So remove all of these things. So those are some of the areas. I guess new MarTech tool can help in a tough economic condition.
Got it. Okay. Slight switch of gears. So I mentioned earlier, different cultures, different age groups, different geographies. you probably have, your internal team probably has a mix of these characteristics, right, in the people that you have. And then if you extend that to your client teams that you interface with, obviously there would be probably even more diverse set of people, right? Languages, geographies, cultures, age groups, and so on. So I may be slightly behind you, but not too far in terms of number of years on this earth. One of the things that's there in tech domains oftentimes is a very relatively younger workforce, right? And so then people in their, maybe my age group, 50s, and then probably similar to your age group, when we are working with team members in tech companies and in our own or externally, we're going to have a lot of people that are probably, in their 20s, 30s, a few in their 40s, right? And so on. And so are there any techniques or any insights or lessons or something to look forward to, right? Something that gets you excited that you've learned through these experiences of working with these team members, and or maybe just to start, what does your team look like?
So yeah, as to the demographic is as exactly what you described. Early stage career employees. So in their 20s and 30s, some have a couple years of experience after college. Some have worked in the business for 5, 6 years as clients, and then jump onto the MarTech vendor side to be customer success managers, solution experts, implementation specialists, etc. So very interesting dynamics. So I think being a parent, honestly, helped me navigating through the dynamics, right, of the team culture. So I have a mix of men and women on the team, have a mix of people from European descent, as well as Asian, Indian as well. And then, one of the distinct work culture that I find is actually Japan. So it's slightly different from Southeast Asian and the Indian and Chinese clients. So very diverse group of people, young people. Everybody is super talented, super fun to be working with. There are challenges as well, right? For me, as a senior leader in the organization, is how do we build trust? Because we do have different interests, we do have different experiences. So although I did get better at taking selfies, taking group selfies. So that was one of the things that I actually learned and adapted pretty well. Joking aside, right? So the younger generations are far more ambitious, far more knowledgeable. I feel that they're actually, their knowledge is much broader than the generation before them, like us.
Sure.
Yeah. And then they're far more social, especially on digital media, than us. So when it comes down to, we need to get business done, we need to form a team, we need to collaborate with each other. There are challenges around expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've learned over the last several years, right, working together with this team, is that you have to find the common ground. So establishing a common goal for the team is like utmost important. Have a sense of team. Because there's a tendency to be self-focused. Everything is about me, again, going back to the culture, the environment that they grow up. It's the participation trophy, it's the instant gratification on social media, likes, hearts, and all that stuff. So a lot of the team members do have the need to have reinforcement, to have feedback, almost constant. So you got to acknowledge those things.
How does critical feedback flow? So obviously there's things that they might be doing okay or right, and then you're like, oh, good job on that. But then how do you deliver, and how does the recipient receive critical feedback constructively and for purpose of growth as opposed to getting defensive and destructive?
This is a very, very good question, because when there's criticism involved, it's, if not managed really well, it gets very emotional. And then, there's the potential of conflict, potential of mental stress, and that would come up. So this goes back to many, many years ago when I first became a people manager over at EMC. One of the early management lessons that I learned is how to give feedback. So two principles. One is you always praise publicly and you criticize privately. So never would I publicly criticize or shame a team member. So that's principle number one. Principle number two is that when in private conversation, when you have opportunities to address the performance gaps or behavior gaps, right, not meeting expectation, it always goes by three rules, right? I call it the FBI rules, right? The facts, behavior, and the impact.
I see.
First, you lay out the facts, right? The situation, acknowledge those, so you get the common ground, and the behavior that you have observed, and then also the impact it has on other people, on the organization, on the business. So those are some of the age-old skills that I have built over the years, and I found that actually to be quite effective. And then also you have to address it timely.
Got it. Okay. I don't know exactly the headcount of your company, but would you call your company mid-size if you just were to look at the size of the employee base?
Yeah, I'd say it's just small to mid-size. Yeah, it's pre-IPO company, and yeah.
Different size companies sometimes have, and it's not just the size, there are other factors, but they can invest more or less, relatively speaking, in training of employees, but also training of managers. And what I find generally is that the smaller the company, less they invest in management training, right? And so in your case, I mean, is there a lot of formal training, or are most of the managers, such as yourself, or top level or mid-level managers, just bringing their expertise and experiences from elsewhere, life, professional life, leadership life in general, and then applying, then just, of course, immersing yourself in terms of the management philosophy and the vision for the company and so on, and then saying, okay, everybody kind of interprets or implements that the way they see best, or are there like common frameworks and things that the company perpetuates amongst all the managers through any formal training or any kind of learning platforms specifically for managers?
Yeah, in recent years, there's the first-time manager program that people go through, as well as mentoring programs for senior leaders to first-time managers or junior, less experienced managers under their wings. So there are programs in place to kind of make sure that managers are not left to their own devices to deal with some of these situations. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's also important, even when managers are very, very experienced and able actually to have some kind of a way to have a common framework, common vocabulary, and so on, right? So sometimes these training programs can help you with that, right? Going back to the fact that when you have a global company, you need to invest, team needs to invest in creating ties that transcend geographic boundaries, cultural boundaries, and so on, right? So that people are like, okay, I am part of the Contentsquare team or whatever the team is. And though I may be in France or Australia or Japan or India or England or UK or the US and so on, right? And that's that's a pretty big task, right, for a company to create that or give people a sense of identity and a belonging that transcends many, many boundaries, which you mentioned earlier, which I had a similar experience. Like there are many people who may not have left their city that are working for Contentsquare. Now they're part of this global team,
Yes.
right? But they may not have flown. Most of them probably have flown, but if they were like you and me, they may not have flown outside of their city ever, right? And so, but I guess the good news also now is that technology makes other cultures available for learning if I'm curious, right? No matter who I am. So that may be an advantage. So one of the questions that I've asked, I know you work very hard. I'm an insomniac sometimes, so sometimes we exchange stuff at very bad hours or odd hours. We can't just work even if you're an American, right? And so obviously you have the family, so which I'm sure has been a huge part of how you spend time, effort, energy, resources, etc. And it's probably been very rewarding. But what else are you doing or have you done? I know you're a golfer, maybe an on and off runner. What was the other thing? The extreme stuff, kickboxing. What were you doing that was probably not good for you?
I did Muay Thai, yeah, for a few years. Yes. Yeah. Wonderful experience, Haresh. You should try it.
One thing I really want to try is walking one day normally after my back heals. So going back to you, Lan, how do you balance how taking care of yourself in personal life, helps you be a better leader, professional, or maybe vice versa? And what's interesting in general, not just professionally?
think overall I benefit from discipline. So early on, so engineering students, right? So very, very analytical. You got to pay attention to all the details, and I think that was imprinted or ingrained in my early years, right? Formative years of having work habit. So I think I benefit from being very disciplined. It shows up on, running meetings on time, ending meetings on time, preparing, even though nowadays I have, shorter time to prepare, but there's always a sense of I cannot show up at a meeting unprepared. So those are some of the things that I try to hold myself to a relatively higher standard, and then I try to impart that onto my team. So onto the non-work type of stuff, I also apply some of those, not as rigidly. So yes, as you mentioned, I love running. I don't love running itself. I love the runner's high afterwards. So I have had asthma growing up. Also, it's always a struggle. I have inhaler with me that help get through the first mile. But after the first mile, it's actually all very good. When I hit my stride, get the cadence, I get to enjoy the music in the ear, get to enjoy the scenery around me, and when air is flowing smoothly. Yeah.
Sounds like a project.
It is, but but the feeling afterwards is actually
I know. Yeah, just like a project if it goes well.
exactly. Yeah, golf is actually a whole new different ball game. It's very much mental, not too much physical. So our mutual friend Wei-Ling and I started golf many, many years ago. It's what, 12, 13 years ago now, at least.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
we're still struggling. Oh, I am at least struggling, but it's a
Striving,
yeah. So
which
whenever
overlaps with struggling too often.
exactly. Through golf, I made a wonderful, tremendous friends, and some of the golfers are the most honorable and most decent human beings that I've ever met. So,
Oh, awesome.
what else? Oh, Muay Thai. Actually, I have to tell you a little bit about my Muay Thai experience.
So, what is Muay Thai? Just very quickly.
It's like MMA. It's Thai fighting, right? It's the traditional fighting invented by Thai people.
Got it. It's a Thai version of martial arts, right?
Martial arts, yeah. You can hit with all parts of your body. You can use all parts of the body as a weapon, hit opponents any part of their body. It's like not like boxing, right? You have certain limited areas and you cannot use legs. So one of the signature move is actually using the shin, using your shin, which is the hardest part, and to strike your opponents.
Sounds just like what I would like.
I tell you, there was one time that I got my bell run with a shin to the head. Yeah. So it's like you get your bell run. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. Something to look forward to.
What I learned, actually, I'll summarize this one. What I have learned through that is you do, in a club in Sydney run by a whole bunch of Brazilians, they have this rule that you have to fight in a cage. But with anybody who shows up in that session that day, at least for 2 minutes. So that this is getting over the fear of fighting. I don't think it is a thing here in the US, but somehow that club was run.
Are you padded? There's no padding, right?
For practices, yeah, you do get padding on your shin and you do wear gloves.
Okay. So it's not crazy, at least initially, or
in practice, but in real fights, just the gloves. Yeah.
How does this tie mentally? Like, so you mentioned runner's high, a golf, I'm guessing, just being outside, and when you go to a golf course, I almost have like a spiritual experience, right? Because it's an outdoor experience, and usually it's park-like setting, and sometimes you're near the water and things like that. So, and typically you will play golf in nice weather. How do these things kind of help you mentally and otherwise?
Provides the mental break. I think golf, both running and golf, provides the mental break from work, and I think both sports, right? I tend to have a meditative state when I'm in the moment, right? Don't have to worry about anything else. Some of the most creative ideas, some of the things actually come when I was doing those activities. Not doing Muay Thai, because that's because you're fighting for survival there. Yeah. One thing I do need to talk about Muay Thai is that it taught me to manage my fear. when you're in a cage with somebody who's practicing Muay Thai for 20 years and I'm just showing up on the block, right? It's like there's a fear of I'm gonna get hit, I'm gonna get hit. Okay. Avoidance of pain kicks in. But after a little while, it taught me to focus on, okay, you're gonna get hit. Okay. It's gonna incur some pain. You could do your best to block the hit so that it's not a direct shot. You block it, and then your focus should be on your counter strike. So that's like a shift of mindset. Okay. Hit is coming. How do you respond? So that's the biggest lesson I learned from Muay Thai, and it was liberating once I figured that out.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it was a huge growth experience.
It was, yeah, until I had my shoulder surgery, yeah, and then Hong put a kibosh on it. I probably shouldn't have told her about the shing on the head experience. So
I see. We've covered a lot of ground, and I know we can spend a lot more time, but I think just learning about your journey, I know we've been spending time together with some common friends, etc., for a number of years, and so I knew some of the things you covered, but some of the things are new information. So it's always good to learn about your journey and people's journey in general.
yeah, do I get to ask you a question?
You can ask me a question.
The easier question, you probably have answered it before, is when you go back in time to when you decide to leave a job, right? That pays well, good working environment to go start your own business, high tech advisors. I'm actually curious in finding out what you had to go through internally in the transition period, and also how did you manage the fear and the doubt of the uncertainty, right? That comes with owning your own business.
Probably each person's situation obviously going to be different. Whatever happened to me may or may not apply to everybody or to you if you're considering such transition. One of the things that is true about me is that I love breadth. And so there weren't too many roles that had the level of breadth that I could have running a consulting team, because you're working with so many people and so many domains and so many clients, right? It's endless, really. It's about how many domains can you handle. And so that was one thing appealing about the consulting business. And then we've talked about this earlier, the element of empathy, which is, so I gained some experience in corporate world and business world. And it's like, okay, how do I put that to work? So consulting business model was one way to do it. But as far as leaving a cushy set of opportunities, working in companies, and then taking the so-called plunge into entrepreneurship, probably for me, there were two things that were really critical. One was, my wife has always been very supportive, and she's been holding a corporate job for a long time, right? And she's still working as a technology leader, this time at Volkswagen, managing a bunch of software engineers. So in a sense, I never took a full risk, right? Because there was some level of safety assured there, right? And then, so that's kind of like covering the risk or the safety. And the second thing is like, why did I think whatever risk I was taking was worth it? And for me, it was a sense of agency or freedom that was really critical, right? Because, and I don't know, maybe I was naive and young and ambitious and maybe somewhat talented earlier. And I always thought that I could run something better than people around me, including my higher ups, right? And so, which probably was misplaced 90% of the time, but I didn't know any better, right? And then it's like, so, why don't you go try to do it, right? If you really think you can do it better. And sometimes that resulted in getting promoted. And they're like, okay, now you do this that you thought you could do better. But then there was a lot of places where culturally I was not a good fit, because in every culture, there's a set of expectations around what a leader is. And it involves in many parts of the world now, but in America, there's this sense of you have to be charismatic, you have to be visible, you have to be, there's a bunch of things. But sometimes many good leaders are none of those things, and they're still very good leaders, but they will not be successful in a middle management role in a corporate entity in America, because they just won't fit expectations of leaders in that organization, right? So I kind of found myself as probably having that leadership style where, for example, visibility was not something that I would focus on, right? And so was it Liu Tzu or Confucius? It was one of the Chinese philosophers who said that The sign of a true leader is when things happen and people think they did it themselves and they don't even know who the leader is. And if you do that in corporate America, you'll be out in no time. But there's one role in America where you could do that. That's to start a company and you're running it, you're owning it. You know, America is a funny place, and this is probably, again, it's not just America, which is if you enter a building in a working capacity, whether you're a manager, leader, or a employee, you have one set of expectations. But if you enter a building and your role is the owner, you have a very different set of expectations, right? So you get a huge free pass from many of the expectations if you are a founder or owner, right? And then, of course, you own a lot of the risk as well now, right? Because if it doesn't work, you're paying the biggest price. So, but then to your question about this fear, whether or not you are the person owning this, but your team, at a team level, they've had the same insecurities that you might have if you think about becoming an entrepreneur, right? Not to pick on Contentsquare, but Contentsquare as a company, it still has the same risks that you as an entrepreneur or you starting a new company would have. It has to find customers. It has to make sure its customers are paying, its employees are delivering. All those things have to happen. So what ends up happening is that risk is everywhere. It's just that I can choose to put the blinders on and say, oh, I have a job, so I don't have the risk. That's not true, right? And it's relative. Of course, there are companies like IBM, Boeing, JP Morgan Chase, or General Electric, General Mills. If you have a job there, it's very unlikely that the entire company is going to be not there 3 years from now, right? So your level of personal risk is probably not as high as, Lan starting a firm, doing small modular reactors. And another thing is that and this is probably true for people in our 50s and maybe later parts of life, but also in 40s, we're not going to be around forever, right? Probably not too dissimilar to the Muay Thai experience you're saying, that we all have fears, and then at some point you realize that you can or you do need to overcome them, right? And it becomes this liberating transition. And we're not going to live forever. No individual is going to live forever. And so at some point you have to overcome your reservations or fears or insecurities about things in exchange for the opportunity to experience certain things that you would not be able to do otherwise.
Beautifully put, Haresh. Beautifully put.
Yeah. And another thing is the money side. Entrepreneurs generally end up making less money than their corporate counterparts, right? So the fear is not misplaced, okay? Because when you have a cushy job and if you stick to it starting in your 20s, the seniority good and you're vesting and in tech, there's options or equity and all these things, they keep accumulating over time. So it becomes quite lucrative, right? If you take the journey as an entrepreneur, it'll be very lumpy, right? And you'll have long dry spells, and then you have floods, and so it's basically feast or famine. But ultimately, there's so many frameworks out there. One that I've heard from multiple sources, including the commander of the Blue Angels of the U.S. Navy, is the biggest thing that contributes to team success and individual success is believing that you will be successful. So, and you've probably heard the quote that whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right, right? Success and entrepreneurship also can be like a drug, and we experience even in non-entrepreneurship roles. So a good friend 3 years ago, before I broke my arm, took me to the golf course, and named Lan actually was his name. And he's like, take a swing. And I'm like, well, I probably took, less than 500 swings in my life before, right? I probably played 5 rounds, but I probably took 200 swings in each round. So maybe I did 1,000 swings before that time 3 years ago. But the drug, reintroduced me to a drug. You know what that drug was? The clean hit sound.
Oh, yes, yes. The one that yeah.
Right? And now what happens is, initially when you start, it's not very frequent. You may not even hear it one time in your first round, right? You probably will, but if it's your very first round, you may not.
That's right. That's the one sound, that's one hit that will keep bringing you back. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's how entrepreneurship can be. So the toughest part is surviving till your first zing sound. Then you're like, oh, I got my high, right? Then you're like, I got to go back. I got to go back, right? And this is true for non-entrepreneurs as well, right? It's like when you start as engineers, we start as salespeople, we start as marketers working for other people. There's a definition or a experience of success that happens, and then you want more of it. And the people who always question you or wonder how the heck can he do that or she do that, it's because they themselves have yet not experienced a clean hit. But when they do, then they get it.
Very well said and beautifully put, Haresh. We're all on this journey to seek what we're about. So if I were to ask Haresh, what drives you, what you're about?
I think this is true for all of us, whether we realize it or not. But I think for me, several ways I kind of look at life. You've probably heard the saying, journey is the destination.
I even made a poster for it. Yep. Through ChatGPT.
That's kind of one of my highest level summaries of life, for me at least. And I think it's true for all of us, whether we explicitly or consciously realize it or live it that way or not. But what is the journey? What happens in the journey? And I think it's growth, right? Growth is the journey. And what is growth? Growth is an expansion of spirit and mind, right? And so basically life is a journey in growth, then that's pretty much it, right? So everything else becomes a detail or an experience, whether being a parent, being a, colleague, leader, entrepreneur, driver, bus driver, car driver, golfer. All those are kind of detailed roles that we play. I don't know all the philosophers and spiritual leaders that came and went, I suppose, but Buddha, right? For him, awakening or growth, he didn't use the word growth. I think he used the word awakening or a realization, maybe, right? Higher and higher level of awareness or enlightenment, right, is what he wanted. And he thought that was the opportunity presented to everybody as humans. And you probably know this too. A big part of that is having fun.
I think you touched on some really, really good points. Love that you're about growth. And I think a lot of human happiness truly go back on, where moments in our life that we're truly, truly happy is when we experience that incremental growth, right? We either learned a new skill or did something better, or get a raise, right? From the job, it's the small incremental growth that we get to experience.
And so I kind of said something that may appear slightly conflicting, which is growth and fun. Growth is not always fun. That you know as well. When you got your bell rung, you grew, but it wasn't a fun experience at the time, right? So, and then I mentioned this in one of the earlier talks, right? So I break life into three things, and they're somewhat in priority order, and they're not mutually exclusive, which is, so you got to have struggle, and you got to have play, and you got to have love, right? And so you're a recipient and giver in all of these, and you need these three elements. So in a way, these three are the vehicles for the journey of growth.
Life is a journey. I'm actually extremely, extremely fortunate to be able to get on this journey, from China to US, and get to travel around the world, get to work with different people. So I'm just filled with gratitude. Wake up every day feeling happy and blessed that I have the journey behind me. What I'm more looking forward to is actually the journey ahead, right? I think some of our conversations about what's ahead in life and what, especially in our stage of life, is actually super, super exciting to me. I want to thank you for this opportunity. You've been wonderful, wonderful friend over the years. So glad that we get a chance to talk. I mean, every time, but particularly on this podcast.
Oh, thank you, Lan. So kind. I'd been looking forward to this, and we'll do it again after some time. Thank you very much. Good to see you, as always.
Likewise. Thanks, Haresh.